Okay, I want you to just close your eyes for a moment. We're going to travel back in time. The date is May 22, 1885, and the location is Paris. But this is not the Paris you see on postcards. It's not the city of light with tourists snapping photos of the Eiffel Tower, which, by the way, hadn't even been built yet.
No, this is a very different Paris. And on this specific day, the city is, well, it's unrecognizable. It has essentially stopped functioning. All the shops are shuttered. The theaters are dark. The cafes are empty, or actually they're overflowing. But nobody is serving coffee. Everyone is out on the street.
And when we say everyone, we aren't exaggerating. The historical accounts we've been digging through describe it as a black ocean of humanity.
It's a staggering image. I mean, we are talking about over 2 million people.
2 million.
Right.
Let's just pause on that number for a second.
Mm-hmm.
The population of Paris at the time was roughly 2 million.
Right.
So statistically, this is the equivalent of the entire city pouring onto the pavement.
Exactly. And people were flooding in from the countryside. They were hanging off the gas lamps, climbing the statues. They were filling every balcony and rooftop, all the way from the Arc de Triomphe to the Pantheon. The government was terrified. I mean, they had the army on standby because a crowd that size, that's not just a gathering, that's a potential revolution.
And usually, when you see a mobilization on that scale in the 19th century, it is for a revolution, or, a coronation of a king, or maybe the return of a conquering general like Napoleon.
But this wasn't for a king, it wasn't for a general.
It was a funeral.
A funeral for a writer.
An 83-year-old poet and novelist, Victor Hugo. It really is hard to wrap your head around that level of fame and try to map this onto the modern world. Is there anyone, any writer, artist, musician, whose death today would shut down New York City or London?
I don't think so.
Would bring 2 million people into the streets?
I really don't think there is.
Yeah.
You'd have to combine the celebrity of, I don't know, a rock star like the Beatles with the moral authority of someone like Martin Luther King Jr., and then add the literary prestige of Shakespeare.
And even then,
I'm not sure you'd get the army on high alert.
So that is the central mystery we are investigating today. We have a massive stack of sources here: biographies, personal letters, even police reports, literary analysis. And our mission is to answer that one question: how? How did a man who started out just writing verses become what the French call a monstre sacré?
A sacred monster.
It's such a powerful term.
It is. And the sources use it to describe someone whose presence is just so overwhelming, whose talent is so excessive, that they almost stop being human. They become a force of nature. Hugo wasn't just an author. By the end, he was the living, breathing symbol of the French Republic itself.
So to understand how he reached that almost godlike status, where do we even begin? Do we start with Les Miserables or The Hunchback of Notre Dame? No, I think to really understand the monster, you have to look at his DNA. We have to go back to 1802. Because Victor Hugo's origin story isn't just a family drama. It's a political civil war fought in his own home.
I was looking at the notes on his parents, and dysfunctional doesn't even begin to cover it.
It was a blood feud. You have to understand the context. Hugo is born in 1802. The French Revolution has just torn the country apart. The king has been beheaded. The churches have been ransacked. And now, Napoleon Bonaparte is rising to power. France is split completely in two.
You have the old France and the new France.
Exactly. And Hugo's parents represented those two poles perfectly. In one corner, you have the father, Joseph Leopold Sigisbert Hugo.
That's a great name.
A very impressive figure. He was a general in Napoleon's army, a man of action, an atheist, a Republican who became a Bonapartist. He believed in the revolution. He believed in tearing down the old hierarchies, spreading liberty, through the barrel of a cannon.
Okay, so he's team progress, team revolution. And in the other corner,
you have the mother, Sophie Trebuchet, and she was from the Vendée region.
And for those listening who aren't experts in 19th century French geography, why does that matter? Why is the Vendée so important here?
The Vendée was the absolute heart of the counter-revolution. These were the people who fought a bloody, vicious guerrilla war against the Republic. Sophie was a staunch Catholic and a die-hard royalist. She believed the king was God's representative on earth and that the revolution was a sin against God.
So you have a Napoleonic general married to a Catholic royalist trying to raise a child together. That just sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was a war zone. I mean, the sources tell us they barely spoke. They eventually separated. But young Victor grew up with this ideological battle happening at his dinner table. He didn't just read about the history of France, he lived it. He literally had the parents' war inside his own head.
And because his dad was a general,
They were constantly on the move, right? This wasn't a stable, sit-at-home childhood in Paris.
Yeah, oh, far from it. It was what our sources call a wandering childhood. They followed the army to Italy, to Spain. He saw the grim realities of war up close really early on. He saw the diverse landscapes of Europe. It gave him this cosmopolitan perspective that most French kids just did not have. But then when he was back in Paris with his mother, he was absorbing all of her royalist views.
So early on, he's more of a mama's boy.
100%. Sophie was the dominant influence. She encouraged his writing, which was great, but she also completely shaped his politics. As a teenager, Victor Hugo was a royalist. He was writing odes to the king.
And the kid had ambition. I mean, serious ambition. There's this line from his journal when he was just 14 years old.
I want to be Chateaubriand or nothing.
That feels like a massive statement for a 14-year-old. Can we just contextualize that? Who is Chateaubriand to a kid in 1816?
Chateaubriand was the literary god of that era. He was the most famous writer in France, a diplomat, a viscount. It's like a kid today picking up a guitar and saying, I want to be a combination of Bob Dylan and Barack Obama, or I want to be nothing. Hugo wasn't just aiming for a career, he was aiming for immortality right from day one.
And he started hitting those targets really early. He's winning poetry prizes. He's getting a pension from King Louis VIII. He's a certified prodigy. But amidst all this success, there's this romance brewing that feels like it's ripped straight from one of his novels.
Adele Fouché, the girl next door, literally, they grew up together.
But of course, because this is the Hugo family, nothing is simple.
No. His mother, Sophie, hated the idea. She didn't think Adele's family was good enough. She thought her golden boy, her genius, was throwing his life away on a common neighbor.
So what did Hugo do? Did he rebel, tell his mother off?
In his own way, he waited. He was incredibly devoted to his mother, so he didn't marry Adele while Sophie was alive. But the moment Sophie died in 1821, Hugo was only 19, he went straight to Adele. They married a year later. It really shows the stubbornness in him. He could be patient, but he would not be denied what he wanted.
Okay, so we're in the 1820s. He's married, he's a rising star, he's a royalist. He's still playing by the rules for the most part. But to become the sacred monster, he has to break the rules.
And that brings us to the 1830s. This is where the switch flips. This is where we see the romantic revolutionary emerge.
And let's talk about the theater. Because today, if a play opens and people don't like it, they write a bad review on Twitter or Yelp. But in 1830, the theater was a battlefield.
It was the absolute center of cultural life. But it was stagnant. So stagnant. The French theater was controlled by the classicists. They were obsessed with these rigid rules from the 17th century.
What kind of rules are we talking about?
Oh, everything. The unities of time and place. The whole play had to happen in 24 hours in one location. No violence on stage. And the language.
Yeah.
It had to be noble. You couldn't use everyday words. You couldn't say handkerchief or door. You had to use these flowery, elaborate metaphors. It was incredibly stiff and, frankly, boring.
And Hugo just decides, I'm going to burn this whole thing down.
He writes Hernani, 1830. And he designed this play specifically to offend the classicists. He broke the rhythm of the verse, the famous French Alexandrine. He moved the pauses. He used slang. He mixed comedy and tragedy, which was strictly forbidden.
And the premiere, the Battle of Hernani. The descriptions in the sources we have are just wild.
It was a full-blown riot. Hugo knew the establishment, the old men with the bald heads, were going to boo him off the stage. So he recruited an army. He went to the art schools, the student quarters. He gathered hundreds of young romantics, painters, poets, musicians.
And they didn't show up in tuxedos.
No, they dressed to shock. They had long hair, beards, these wild, colorful costumes. The most famous detail is the poet Théophile Gautier, who wore a bright red waistcoat, some accounts say pink, that was meant to be a visual scream against the gray suits of the establishment.
So the curtain goes up, and what happened?
Absolute chaos. The classicists hissed, the romantics cheered, they were throwing vegetables, shouting insults at each other, people were physically fighting in the aisles. And this didn't just happen on opening night. It went on for months. Every single performance was a brawl.
Why did they care so much? It's just a play.
Because it wasn't just a play to them, it was a battle for the soul of France. It was the young generation saying to the old generation, your rules are dead, we want freedom, we want emotion, we want life. And Victor Hugo was their general.
And he won. Hernani establishes him as the leader of the Romantic movement. But he doesn't stop there. The very next year, 1831, he releases a book that everyone listening knows, Notre Dame de Paris.
Or, as we know it in English, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But that English title is actually pretty misleading.
Right, because it focuses everything on Quasimodo.
Yeah.
But Hugo's title, Notre Dame de Paris, focuses on the cathedral itself.
Exactly. The real main character of the book isn't the hunchback, and it isn't Esmeralda. It's the building. You have to realize, in 1831, Gothic architecture was despised. People thought it was ugly, barbaric, a product of the Dark Ages. They were tearing down medieval buildings in Paris or covering them up with plaster to make them look more modern and classical.
So Notre Dame was literally falling apart.
It was a wreck. It was being used as a warehouse in some parts. The statues were broken. It was covered in grime. Hugo wrote this massive, epic novel, basically as a PR campaign to save the building. He wanted to make people fall in love with the architecture again.
There's a chapter in the book that is, well, it's pretty dense, but the sources all say it's the key to his whole philosophy. Cecituera cella. This will kill that.
The book will kill the edifice. It's a brilliant observation. Hugo argued that since the beginning of time, architecture was the great book of humanity. If you wanted to tell a story or record history, you built a temple, a pyramid, a cathedral. The stained glass and the statues were the Bible for people who couldn't read.
But then, Gutenberg, the printing press.
Gutenberg changed everything.
Mhm.
Paper is cheaper than stone. Books are portable. Ideas could travel faster than ever before. Hugo realized that the era of building great cathedrals was over because the book had taken its place as the primary way humans store and transmit knowledge.
But the irony is, he used a book to save the building.
Precisely. He used the killer to save the victim. And it worked. The novel was such a sensation that it sparked this massive restoration movement, the spire that we all tragically saw burn down a few years ago.
Yeah.
That was put there in the 19th century because of the interest Hugo generated. The famous gargoyles we all associate with Notre Dame, many of those were added during that restoration. He literally saved the cathedral with his pen.
So by the 1830s, he is the undisputed king of literature. He's conquered the stage, he's conquered the novel. But the 1840s, this is where the story takes a very, very tragic turn. This is section 3 in our outline, tragedy in politics.
The 1840s broke Victor Hugo, and specifically the year 1843.
This involves his daughter, Leopoldine.
His eldest child, his absolute favorite, the light of his life. She had just gotten married to a young man named Charles Vacquerie. They were so young, just 19 and 26.
And they were out on a boat on the Seine.
Yes, near a town called Villequier. It was a calm day, but the boat was a racing skiff, a bit unstable. A sudden gust of wind just capsized it.
And the detail that just haunts me is her dress.
She was wearing a heavy, voluminous dress, which was the fashion. When she fell in, the wet fabric it pulled her down like an anchor. Her husband, Charles, was a good swimmer. He tried desperately to pull her up, but he couldn't. The weight was too much. And realizing he couldn't save her, he refused to let go. He chose to let himself drown with her. They were found in each other's arms.
That is absolutely heart-wrenching. But the way Hugo found out, I don't think I've ever read a sadder story in any of our sources.
He was on vacation. He was in the south of France, traveling with his mistress, actually. He walked into a cafe in a town called Rochefort to catch up on the news. He picked up a newspaper, Le Siècle, and saw the headline. That's how he learned his favorite child was dead.
Just imagine that moment.
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting in a bustling cafe, maybe waiting for a coffee, and your entire world just ends.
It destroyed him. The sacred monster went silent. He didn't publish a single book of poetry for over 10 years. He couldn't. The grief was too absolute. The sources say he would spend hours just staring at the wall.
During this dark time, there was someone standing in the shadows, helping him survive. We need to talk about Juliette Ray.
We do. Juliette is one of the great unsung heroes of literary history. She was an actress he met in 1833. She became his mistress, but she was so much more than that. She was his shadow wife.
The sources describe her as his unpaid secretary, his travel companion, his nurse, basically his everything.
She devoted 50 years of her life to him. She saved every scrap of paper he wrote on. She meticulously copied his manuscripts. And let's be honest, Hugo was not an easy man. He had a massive ego, and as the sources delicately put it, an immense libido. Meaning he slept with hundreds of women. He was married to Adele. He had Juliette as his primary mistress, but he had affairs constantly, even into his 70s and 80s.
And Juliette stayed through all of that.
She stayed. She accepted a life of semi-seclusion, often living in an apartment down the street from the official family home. When he went into exile, she packed her bags and went with him without a second thought. Without Juliette Drouot, we probably wouldn't have the preserved legacy of Victor Hugo that we have today.
So, Hugo is grieving. He's silent, at least literally. But his energy has to go somewhere, and it goes into politics. This is where we see the final shift from that royalist boy to the Republican man.
It's a gradual shift, but it crystallizes in 1848 when another revolution happens. The king is overthrown, the Second Republic is declared, and Victor Hugo gets elected to the assembly.
And he's not a quiet backbencher, is he?
No, he becomes this radical, booming voice. He actually sits on the right initially, but his speeches are moving further and further to the left. He fights for universal suffrage. He fights for free education for all children. And he fights passionately to abolish the death penalty, a cause he was obsessed with his entire life.
There's a specific speech mentioned in all our research, destroying poverty, or détruire la misère.
This was a shock to the system. You have to remember, in the mid-19th century, most politicians believed poverty was natural. It was just fate. Or it was the fault of the poor. They were lazy or sinful or just didn't work hard enough.
And Hugo stood up in the assembly and said, no.
He said, poverty is not a decree of fate, it is a legislative failure. He argued that society creates poverty, and therefore society has a moral duty to eliminate it. He told the assembly, you have done nothing as long as the people suffer.
That sounds incredibly modern. You could hear that speech today.
It was revolutionary, and it made him enemies. The conservatives, his old friends, they called him a traitor. They shouted him down during his speeches, but the people, the working class, started to see him as their champion.
But champions are dangerous to tyrants. And in 1851, a tyrant steps onto the stage.
Yeah.
This leads us to the next massive chapter of his life, the Great Exile.
Enter Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of the great Napoleon. He was elected president, but he wanted more. He wanted to be emperor. The Constitution said no. So in December 1851, he staged a coup d'etat. He dissolved the assembly and seized total power.
And Hugo, he didn't just write a strongly worded letter to the editor.
He hit the streets. He was on the barricades. He tried to rally the people of Paris to fight back. He was shouting at soldiers, telling them to respect the Constitution and defend the Republic. But the army was loyal to Bonaparte. The resistance was crushed.
So now Hugo is a wanted man. There's a price on his head.
He has to flee. And it's a scene straight out of a thriller. He gets a fake passport under the name Jacques Fermont. He disguises himself as a typesetter, a manual laborer. He manages to slip across the border to Brussels just in time.
And from there, he eventually lands in the Channel Islands. First Jersey, then Guernsey, and this is where he spends the next 19 years.
19 years, just think about that. From age 50 to nearly 70, the prime of his political life, he is stuck on a rock in the ocean.
But he turned that rock into a fortress. He bought a house, Holtville House. And I want to talk about the interior design because looking at the photos, this place is just, it's wild.
It is a masterpiece of eccentricity. Hugo designed everything himself. He scoured antique shops for old chests and tapestries and woodwork, then he would chop them up and reassemble them into new, fantastical pieces of furniture. The sources call the house a poem in several rooms.
How so? What does that mean?
It's all symbolic. The ground floor is dark, almost gothic. It feels like a crypt. It represents the suffering of humanity, the darkness of exile. But as you climb the stairs, the house gets lighter and lighter.
And at the very top,
the crystal room. It was a glass lookout he built on the roof. It was like a greenhouse. And this is where he worked. He had this tiny fold-down desk. He wrote standing up, surrounded by light, looking out at the sea.
And on a clear day, he could see France.
He could see the coast of Normandy. Imagine the psychological torture and the sheer power of that. Standing in your glass tower, looking at the home you are banned from, and writing the words that you hope will one day bring down the empire.
He called Napoleon III Napoleon the Little, right?
Yes, Napoleon the Petit. It was a savage burn. He was saying, you have the name of a giant, but you are a dwarf. Napoleon III actually offered him amnesty in 1859. He said, okay, Hugo, you can come back now. All is forgiven.
And Hugo refused.
He famously replied, when liberty returns, I will return. He refused to compromise. He made his exile a badge of honor, a moral weapon against the regime.
And while he was in that glass room, he wasn't just writing political pamphlets. He was finishing the big one, the novel of the century, Les Miserables.
He had started it years before, but he'd put it aside. In Guernsey, he picked it up again, and he poured everything into it. His grief for his daughter, his hatred of poverty, his belief in redemption and justice.
When it was published in 1862, it was a global phenomenon, wasn't it?
It was. It was one of the first truly global book launches. It was released simultaneously in Paris, London, Brussels, St. Petersburg. People were lining up for blocks. But what's really moving is who was buying it. It wasn't just the intellectuals.
The sources say factory workers were pooling their wages to buy a single copy.
They would. They'd set up a subscription. 10 guys would chip in, buy one book, and then one of them who could read would read it aloud to the others while they worked. Because Jean Valjean, the convict, the outcast, the miserable one, was them. Hugo gave the poor a hero who wasn't a joke or a villain, but a man of immense dignity.
The establishment hated it, though.
Oh, they despised it. The critics panned it. The Vatican banned it, put it right on the index of forbidden books. They said it was dangerous because it suggested that the law could be wrong and that a criminal could be a saint. But they couldn't stop it. It became the Bible of the oppressed.
So Hugo is in exile, but he's more present in France than the emperor is. He is the conscience of the nation, speaking from across the water.
Exactly. And then history turns again. This brings us to Section 5, the return and the legend.
1870. Napoleon III makes a huge, fatal mistake. He declares war on Prussia.
And he loses. Badly. He is captured at the Battle of Sedan. The empire collapses overnight. The Third Republic is proclaimed.
When liberty returns, I will return.
And he kept his promise. He boarded a train for Paris immediately. And the scene at the Gare du Nord station, the police estimated there were thousands and thousands of people waiting.
And when he stepped off the train?
Complete bedlam. People were crying, screaming, "Vive Victor Hugo! Vive la République!" He tried to give a speech, but no one could hear him over the cheering. He was carried through the streets on people's shoulders. He wasn't just a writer coming home. He was the grandfather of the Republic returning to take care of his family.
But that happy reunion didn't last long. The Prussians were still there. They surrounded Paris. The siege of Paris began.
This was a brutal, brutal winter. Paris was cut off from the world for months. No food could get in.
The stories about the food are they're gruesome.
They are. People ate the horses. Then they ate the cats and the dogs. And then they turned to the zoo.
The Jardin des Plantes.
Yes. The restaurants started serving exotic animals. We actually have menus from that time. Roasted camel, elephant consommé.
But Hugo, did he eat this?
He did. He records in his diary. We were eating horse. Then later, we are eating the unknown. He was 68 years old, a national treasure, and he was starving along with everyone else. He refused to leave the city. He even used the proceeds from a new book of poetry to buy cannons for the defense of Paris.
That is commitment. But even after the war, the tragedy in his personal life just kept coming. It feels like the price of his genius was that he had to lose everyone he loved.
It really does. It's heartbreaking. His wife Adele had died in 1868, just before his return. His son Charles died suddenly of a stroke in 1871. His other son, François Victor, died of tuberculosis 2 years later. And his daughter Adele, the only child who outlived him, went mad. She developed a tragic obsession with a soldier who didn't love her, ran away to Canada chasing him, and ended up institutionalized for the rest of her life.
So he's an old man, alone in this big house, just surrounded by ghosts.
Except for his 2 grandchildren, George's and Jean, his son Charles's kids. And this is the final, beautiful softening of the monster. He became the ultimate doting grandfather. He wrote a whole book of poetry called The Art of Being a Grandfather.
Which is a huge departure from political revolution and Gothic cathedrals.
It is. It's all about taking walks in the park, telling stories, spoiling the kids rotten. It showed the public that this titan, this storm of a man, also had this incredibly gentle, loving heart. It made them love him even more.
And that brings us to the legend. By the 1880s, he isn't just a writer. He is a living saint.
Literally. For his 80th birthday in 1881, the government declared a national holiday, and they gave him a gift. They renamed the street he lived on.
Avenue Delot became Avenue Victor Hugo.
Imagine that. Imagine writing a letter to a friend and your return address is number 50, your name Avenue.
That is the ultimate flex.
It really is. And 600,000 people paraded past his window that day just to wave at him. He sat there on his balcony with his grandchildren waving back. He was the grandfather of France.
There's one more aspect of his legacy that I found in this stack, and it completely surprised me. It takes us all the way to Vietnam.
Caodaism. Yes, this is fascinating. Caodaism is a religion that emerged in Vietnam in the 1920s. It's a syncretic faith blending Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, and Confucianism. And they have a pantheon of saints they communicate with.
Victor Hugo is one of them.
He is. Victor Hugo, Sun Yat-sen, and a Vietnamese poet named Nguyen Binh Kim are considered the 3 Holy Spirits. There's a mural in their main temple showing Hugo writing, "God and humanity and love and justice for all mankind." They believe his spirit sends messages from the beyond. It just shows how his message of universal justice and compassion transcended language and culture.
Which brings us right back to where we started, the funeral. May 1885. He falls ill. He catches pneumonia.
He knew the end was coming. And his last words, they are perhaps the most poetic last words in history.
I see black light.
Je vois de la lumière noire.
What do you think he meant by that?
I think it sums up his entire life, his entire artistic project. He spent his career looking into the darkness, the prisons, the sewers, the poverty, the human soul's despair, to find the light. He believed that even in the blackest moments, there is a light of redemption, a spark of hope. Black light.
And then, the procession. The 2 million people. And he was carried on the hearse of the poor.
That was his specific request. He wrote it in his will. I give 50,000 francs to the poor. I want to be carried to the cemetery in the hearse of the poor. He could have had a golden carriage drawn by a dozen horses, but he chose the simple wooden cart of a pauper. And that, I think, is why the people loved him. He was a titan, but he was their titan.
So we've covered the entire life, the origins, the battles, the exile, the return. When you look at this sacred monster now, what is the big takeaway? What should we act on?
You know, I think the lesson of Hugo is that you don't have to stay in your lane. We live in a world of intense specialization. You're a writer or a politician or an activist. Hugo refused to choose. He used his art to change politics, and he used his politics to fuel his art. He proved that a poet can actually change the shape of a city and the laws of a nation.
He was a storm that swept through the 19th century.
He was, and we are still feeling the rain today.
Well, that brings us to the end of our journey. It's been quite a ride from 1802 to 1885.
It always is with a figure like Hugo, a whole century in one man.
If you enjoyed this exploration of a literary giant, if you learned something new about the man behind Les Miserables, please do us a huge favor. Subscribe to History Titans. Like the audio, leave us a comment, and maybe share this with a friend who loves history or literature. It really helps us keep these explorations coming.
Absolutely, there are plenty more titans to discuss.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.